On 22nd January 1879, Anglo Zulu Battle of Isandlwana in South Africa was a major and dramatic conflict between the Zulu Kingdom and British Empire. It remains one of the most significant defeats in British colonial history. The British Empire under Lord Chelmsford launched an invasion of the independent Zulu Kingdom. The invasion was partly motivated by imperial ambitions and the desire to control the region. Chelmsford split his forces into several columns, underestimating the military capability of the Zulu warriors.
A Zulu force of some 20,000 warriors attacked a portion of the British main column, consisting of approximately 1,800 British, colonial, and native troops, with approximately 350 civilians. The Zulus were equipped merely with the traditional assegai iron spears and cowhide shields. The British and colonial troops were armed with modern Martini Henry breech-loading rifle and two 7-pounder mountain guns, deployed as field guns as well as a Hale rocket battery. The Zulus had a vast disadvantage in weapons technology, but they greatly outnumbered the British and ultimately overwhelmed them, killing over 1,300 troops, including all those out in the forward firing line. The British were unprepared for the attack from the large Zulu contingent, which had moved quickly, and were attacked along the flanks by the Zulus using their traditional horns and chest of the buffalo formation. The Zulu army suffered anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 killed. The battle was a victory for the Zulus and caused the defeat of the first British invasion of Zululand. The British army had suffered its worst defeat against an indigenous foe equipped with vastly inferior military technology. Isandlwana resulted in the British taking a much more aggressive approach in the Anglo Zulu War, leading to a heavily reinforced second invasion and the destruction of King Cetshwayo's hopes of a negotiated peace. The Zulu army was commanded by Chingwayo Kamahole of the Khoza and Mavumengwana Kandlela, a chief of Ntuli people. The Nduna Dabulamanzi Kampande, half-brother of Cetshwayo, commanded the Undi Corps after Zibebu Kamapita, the regular Inkosi or commander, was wounded.
While Chelmsford was in the field seeking them, the entire Zulu army had outmaneuvered him, moving behind his force with the intention of attacking the British army on 23rd January. Henry Pullein had received reports of large forces of Zulus throughout the morning of 22nd January from 8 a.m. on vedettes, had observed Zulus on the hills to the left front, and Lieutenant Chard, while he was at the camp, observed a large force of several thousand Zulu moving to the British left around the hill of Isandlwana. Pullein sent word to Chelmsford, which was received by the general between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. The main Zulu force was discovered at around 11 a.m. by men of Lieutenant Charles Raw's troop of scouts, who chased a number of Zulus into a valley, only then seeing most of the 20,000 men of the main enemy force sitting in total quiet. This valley has generally been thought to be the Ngwebeni, some 7 miles from the British camp, but may have been closer in the area of the spurs of Nkutu Hill. Having been discovered, the Zulu force leapt to the offensive. Raw's men began a fighting retreat back to the camp, and a messenger was sent to warn Pullein.
The Zulu adopted their traditional pitched battle formation, known as the horns and chest of the buffalo, with the aim of encircling the British position. From Pullein's vantage point in the camp, at first only the right horn and then the chest, center of the attack, seemed to be developing. Pullein sent out first one, then all 6 companies into an extended firing line, with the aim of meeting the Zulu attacker head-on and checking it with firepower. Durnford's men, upon meeting elements of the Zulu center, had retreated to a donga, a dried-out watercourse, on the British right flank where they formed a defensive line. The rocket battery, under Durnford's command, which was not mounted and dropped behind the rest of the force, was isolated and overrun very early in the engagement. The 2 battalions of native troops were in Durnford's line. While all their British officers and NCOs carried rifles, only 1 in 10 of the native soldiers under their command had a firearm,
and those few weapons were muzzle-loading muskets with limited ammunition. Many of the native troops began to leave the battlefield at this point.
Pauline only made one change to the original disposition after about 20 minutes of firing, bringing in the companies in the firing line slightly closer to the camp. For an hour or so until afternoon, the disciplined British volleys pinned down the Zulu center, inflicting many casualties and causing the advance to stall. Indeed, morale remained high within the British line. The Martini Henry rifle was a powerful weapon and the men were experienced. Additionally, the shell fire of the Royal Artillery forced some Zulu regiments to take cover behind the reverse slope of a hill. Nevertheless, the left horn of the Zulu advance was moving to outflank and envelop the British right.
Durnford's men, who had been fighting the longest, began to withdraw, and their rate of fire diminished. Durnford's withdrawal exposed the right flank of the British regulars, which, with the general threat of the Zulu encirclement, caused Pauline to order a withdrawal back to the camp. The regulars' retreat was performed with order and discipline, and the men conducted a fighting withdrawal into the camp. Durnford's retreat, however, exposed the flank of G Company, which was overrun relatively quickly. There was a solar eclipse on that day. At 2:30 p.m., an officer in advance of Chelmsford's force gave this eyewitness account of the final stage of the battle at about 3 p.m. In a few seconds, we distinctly saw the guns fired again, one after the other, sharp. This was done several times, a pause, and then a flash. The sun was shining on the camp at the time, and then the camp looked dark, just as if a shadow was passing over it. The guns did not fire after that, and in a few minutes, all the tents had disappeared. Nearly the same moment is described in a Zulu warrior's account. The sun turned black in the middle of the battle. We could still see it over us, or should have thought we had been fighting till evening. Then we got into the camp, and there was a great deal of smoke and firing. Afterwards, the sun came out bright again. The presence of large numbers of bodies grouped together suggests the resistance was more protracted than originally thought, and a number of desperate last stands were made. Evidence shows that many of the bodies, today marked by cairns, were found in several large groups around the camp, including one stand of around 150 men. A Zulu account describes a group of the forming a square on the neck of Isandlwana. Colonial cavalry, the NMP, and the Carabiniers, who could easily have fled as they had horses, died around Durnford in his last stand, while nearby their horses were found dead on their picket rope. What is clear is that the slaughter was complete in the area around the camp and back to Natal, along the fugitives' drift. The fighting had been hand-to-hand combat, and no quarter was given to the British regulars. The Zulus had been commanded to ignore the civilians in black coats, and this meant that some officers, whose patrol dress was dark blue and black at the time, were spared and escaped. Once their ammunition had been expended, surviving British soldiers had no choice but to fight on with bayonet and rifle butt. A Zulu account relates a single-handed fight by the guard of Chelmsford's tent, a big Irishman who kept the Zulus back with his bayonet until he was speared and the General's Union flag captured. Both the colours of the were lost, while the Queen's colour was carried off the field by Lieutenant Melville on horseback, but lost when he crossed the river, despite Lieutenant Cargill having come to his aid. Both Melville and Cargill were killed after crossing the river, and received posthumous Victoria Crosses in 1907 as the legend of their gallantry grew, and, after 27 years of steady campaigning by the late Mrs. Melville, on the strength of Queen Victoria being quoted as saying that, if they had survived, they would have been awarded the Victoria Cross. Garnet Wolseley, who replaced Chelmsford. The 1,800-plus force of British troops and African auxiliaries, over 1,300 were killed, most of them Europeans, including Field Commanders Pauline and Durnford. Only 5 Imperial officers survived, including Lieutenants Henry Curling and Horace Smith Dorian, and the 52 officers lost was the most lost by any British battalion up to that time. Amongst those killed was Surgeon Major Peter Shepherd, a first aid pioneer. The Natal native contingent lost some 400 men, and there were 240 lost from the group of 249 Amachunu African auxiliaries. Perhaps the last to die was Gabangaye, the portly chief of the Amachunu Natal native contingent, who was given over to be killed by the Udabi, porter or carrier, boys. The captured Natal native contingent soldiers were regarded as traitors by the Zulu and executed.
The Zulu casualties is perhaps between 1,500 and 2,000 dead, with a similar number wounded. Some 1,000 Martini Henry rifles, the 2 field artillery guns, 400,000 rounds of ammunition, 3 colors, most of the 2,000 draft animals and 130 wagons, provisions such as tin food, biscuits, beer, overcoats, tents, and other supplies were taken by the Zulu on the field. The survivors, most were from the auxiliaries. The 2 field artillery guns, which were taken to Ulundi as trophies, were later found abandoned by a British patrol after the Battle of Ulundi. Though Isandlwana was a disaster for the British, the Zulu victory did not end the war. With the defeat of Chelmsford's central column, the invasion of Zululand collapsed and would have to be restaged. Not only were there heavy manpower casualties to the main column, but most of the supplies, ammunition, and draft animals were lost. As King Kitchweo feared, the embarrassment of the defeat would force the policymakers in London, who to this point had not supported the war, to rally to the support of the pro-war contingent in the Natal government and commit whatever resources were needed to defeat the Zulus. Despite local numerical superiority, the Zulus did not have the manpower, technological resources, or logistical capacity to match the British in another, more extended campaign. The Zulus may have missed an opportunity to exploit the victory and possibly win the war that day on their own territory. The reconnaissance force under Chelmsford was more vulnerable to being defeated by an attack than the camp. It was strung out and somewhat scattered. It had marched with limited rations and ammunition it could not now replace, and it was panicky and demoralized by the defeat at Isandlwana. Near the end of the battle, about 4,000 Zulu warriors of the unengaged reserve Undi MP, after cutting off the retreat of the survivors to the Buffalo River southwest of Isandlwana, crossed the river and attacked the fortified mission station at Roque's Drift. The station was defended by only 150 British soldiers, who nonetheless inflicted considerable casualties and repelled the attack. Elsewhere, the left and right flanks of the invading forces were now isolated and without support. The number 1 column under the command of Charles Pearson was besieged for 2 months by a Zulu force led by Kampande and Mavamengwana at Showe, while the number 4 column under Evelyn Wood halted its advance and spent most of the next 2 months skirmishing in the northwest around Tinta's Kraal. Following Isandlwana and Rock's Drift, the British and colonials were in complete panic over the possibility of a counter-invasion of Natal by the Zulus. All the towns of Natal lagered up and fortified, and provisions and stores were laid in. Bartelfrere stoked the fear of invasion despite the fact that, aside from Rock's Drift, the Zulus made no attempt to cross the border. Immediately following the battle, Zulu Prince Ndanboko urged them to advance and take the war into the colony, but they were restrained by a commander Kantati, reminding them of Ketchwayo's prohibiting the crossing of the border. Unbeknownst to the inhabitants of Natal, Ketchwayo, still hoping to avoid outright war, had prohibited any crossing of the border in retaliation, and was incensed over the violation of the border by the attack on Rock's Drift. The British government's reasoning for a new invasion was threefold. The first was the loss of national pride as a result of the defeat, and the desire to avenge it by winning the war. The second concerned the domestic political implications at the next parliamentary elections held in Britain. The final reason concerned the empire. Unless the British were seen to win a clear-cut victory against the Zulus, it would send a signal to the outside world that the British Empire was vulnerable to the point where the destruction of a British field army could alter the policy of Britain's government. The British government was concerned that the Zulu victory could inspire imperial unrest, particularly among the Boers, and as such sought to quash any such possibilities by swiftly defeating the Zulu Kingdom. After Isandlwana, The British Field Army in South Africa was heavily reinforced and again invaded Zululand. Sir Garnet Wolseley was sent to take command and relieve Chelmsford, as well as Bartle Frere. Chelmsford, however, avoided handing over command to Wolseley and managed to defeat the Zulus in a number of engagements, the last of which was the Battle of Ulundi, followed by capture of King Cetshwayo. With the fall of the Disraeli government, Bartle Frere was recalled in August 1880, and the policy of confederation was abandoned. The British government encouraged the sub-kings of the Zulus to rule their sub-kingdoms without acknowledging a central Zulu power. By the time King Cetshwayo was allowed to return home, the Zulu Kingdom had ceased to exist as an independent entity. Today, Isandlwana is a symbol of heroic resistance, military miscalculation, and the brutal realities of colonial conquest. The battlefield is now a historic monument, reminding us of a day when empire met its match. For more videos on history content, subscribe to channel Echoes of Inspiration. Thank you.